All right, this is part 2 of 2. In the first part, I talked about the origins of child welfare in New York, and then the way foster care was weaponized against Native Americans and then later reformed by the Indian Child Welfare Act. So start with that one, link below in the description. Next, I'd like to talk about how child welfare has developed more recently in Washington state. So after the Social Security Act in 1935 and the Indian Child Welfare Act in 1978, the federal government's framework for child welfare policy was largely established, and there have been a few changes to it since then, but those laws are still the bones of what we call child welfare. But the work is done by states. And in Washington state, we got our first CPS unit and mandatory reporting laws in 1969. That is, it became a requirement then that, and remains today, that people who work with children for a living, teachers, coaches, daycare staff, report to the government when they have reason to believe a child has been mistreated. And CPS, or Child Protective Services, is the group of people who investigate such reports. So 1969, we had a CPS unit for the first time. And then in 1985, a bill was passed that forbade foster parents to spank children in foster care. Good law, important change. And when that change was made, we started offering training for foster parents for the first time. Before that, it was kind of hit or miss. Like sometimes you could find it, sometimes you couldn't. But this is a really big policy change. And so foster parent training became universal, mostly to roll out this new policy. So we were doing child welfare and social work for 18 years before we had formal training for foster parents. And then for 2 more years before we had formal training for professional social workers. Things that make you go, huh? And then in 2013, Washington State implemented a program called Extended Foster Care, which does a great job caring for kids who would have previously aged out or turned 18 while in foster care and then suddenly become ineligible for any support. Extended foster care makes it possible for kids like that to stay in foster care for as long as they stay in school. It's a great program, actually much different than how most people think it works. Many people ask about aging out and they inquire why Skookum doesn't work on it. And the answer is that it isn't how you've heard. Or how it was back in the day. Kids who turn 18 don't just get dumped out on the street. Some kids choose to leave, and they're adults, so they're free to do that, but many of them come back. Our friends over at Northwest Youth Services are actually doing some really great work on teen and young adult homelessness. If that's an issue you care about, you should check them out. Whenever I talk about the history of child welfare, I'm always struck by how sloppy it is. It is failure forward. It is one imperfect solution implemented imperfectly that creates unintended consequences which are addressed by more imperfect solutions, and round we go. But each step forward is improvement, and we've come a really long way. We have work to do yet, but we are on a hopeful trajectory.